think in the longer term, it doesn't really matter who wins because whether it's a Democrat or Republican person, they both will hand out goodies to their constituents. The Republicans will cut taxes. The Democrats will do more government welfare. At the end of the day, the deficit rises, money is printed and borrowed, and the denominator of amount of fiat global dollar liquidity increases. Therefore, Bitcoin and crypto goes up.
장기적으로 이번 대선에서 민주당, 공화당 누가 이기든 간에 관계없이 정부는 결국 달러를 찍어내서 재정 지출을 늘릴 것이고 유동성의 분모가 커지면 크립토 시장은 결국 우상향하게 될 것이라고 주장하고 있는 인물은 비트맥스 창업자 아서 헤이즈입니다. 아서 헤이즈는 크립토 시장의 거시적인 흐름을 보는 통찰력이 그 누구보다 뛰어난 인물이고 암호화폐 시장에 매우 영향력이 있는 핵심 플레이어인 만큼 그가 생각하는 현재 글로벌 경제의 전반적인 흐름과 하반기 크립토 시장의 전망에 대한 그의 디테일한 인사이트에 대해서 함께 들어보도록 하겠습니다.
Okay, so Arthur, let's start off with the most important question first in terms of what the hell is going on in the markets. I mean, we've seen like the yen is ripping, the carry trade is unwinding, the VIX is spiking, the recession fears, there was massive crypto dumping over the weekend, potentially around a fund that you alluded to in a tweet blowing up. And it's just really all markets are going haywire as a result of mostly as a result of what's been happening with the yen carry trade. So I guess the first question is like, what exactly do you think is going on? And how do you see it playing out over the next few months?
I guess before I get to the yen carry trade, which I think is the most important thing that's going on right now, and I've written, I think, 2 essays about what's going on in Japan and what has gone on in Japan for the past 2 to 3 decades to lead to my thesis that the dollar-yen exchange rate is the most important variable to the macroeconomic landscape. But before we get there, I want to talk a little bit about something a bit esoteric, which is the U.S. Treasury's quarterly refunding announcement. Now, unfortunately, I had a really awesome essay that was going to drop either already today or next day to talk all about this and what I think was going to happen, and then this shit happened, and then I got to write about the yen.
That's sidetracked, yeah.
But at a very high level for the second quarter of this year, from basically April until June, due to tax receipts in the U.S., the U.S. Treasury net took Treasury bills, which are bonds that mature less than 1 year, have no coupon payment, out of circulation. And that's what's caused the reverse repo facility, which a lot of people have been tracking, to basically, it bottomed at the end of March, early April, and essentially rose a bit, which removed liquidity from the system. And basically, starting in April, we had the weakness in crypto, and we haven't really recovered from it since. Now, that is all starting to change in July and August and September and the rest of the year, as the Treasury has communicated to the market that it will now begin reissuing on a net basis Treasury bills because it needs to fund the government. And my cynical view is that it needs prices of stuff to keep going up into the election in the US. Now, that's kind of like my reasoning as to like why crypto, went down, didn't really do much over the summer, is because the dollar liquidity situation was not very conducive to assets like crypto doing super well. Okay, that's a very small technical thing. If we move to what's happened in the last, 4 trading days, which really started when dollar yen peaked at 162, I think earlier in July, is that the dollar yen carry trade is beginning to unwind. And for those of you who don't know what that is, the carry trade is when I borrow a currency with a low interest rate and I invest in assets of another currency that yield more or have a higher expectation of price appreciation. And so Japan Inc., which is the central bank, the BOJ, Bank of Japan, Japanese corporates, banks, insurance funds, pension funds, households, essentially all grouped together, have this carry trade on in about 25 trillion US dollars of size. So it is the largest position and most important trading position in the world, and it's architected because the BOJ essentially is creating yen out of thin air, and various Japanese entities are borrowing that yen and buying domestic stocks like the Nikkei 225 and bonds, Japanese government bonds, JGBs, and then they're going abroad. They're investing in U.S. Treasuries, which have a higher yield than JGBs, And most importantly, they're buying stocks. They're buying U.S. tech stocks and the S&P and the NASDAQ and all this kind of stuff, right? And so over the last 20 to 30 years, it's built up this massive position. And as the yen weakens, this trade makes money. And because the BOJ alone can determine essentially what the dollar-yen exchange rate is based on how much liquidity in terms of yen they want to print, they can print that exchange rate wherever they want. Now, a weakening yen isn't really a problem until inflation shows up. And so obviously inflation has showed up post-COVID, oil is up, goods inflation is up. And so for the first time in about 30 to 40 years, Japanese people are experiencing inflation and they're not happy about it. Obviously the media is not really reporting this, but on the ground in Japan, there's a lot of rumblings. I was like, what the fuck is going on? Why is stuff more expensive? My wages haven't gone up enough. Property prices are going up. Rents are going up. And so there's been a lot of backlash at the government officials. And finally, that got to too much. And the BOJ had to communicate, yes, we're going to normalize policy, which means we're going to start unwinding this trade by allowing interest rates to rise and raising interest rates and stopping buying of JGBs. That started, the meeting was on the 31st of July. The market had expected this to happen a few days earlier. And that's kind of, the first move was 162 down to 155, 150 in yen. Once the meeting happened, boom, that was about 5 days ago. That's what really kicked off this shit show, which is dollar yen went from about 155 to, I think a low yesterday was 142. Now we're about 145 right now.
It's fascinating. You don't think that because I think that earlier in the year they moved from negative interest rates, the BOJ, to zero. You don't think that was the markets not expecting potentially that these interest rate rises would happen eventually because of these factors you allude to? Given that the yen had been super strong, super weak previously, and people have been complaining in the population. So you don't think that people could have seen this coming potentially? The yen carrying trade would unwind so violently?
It's like an unstable avalanche, right? Looking at the snowpack that it's unstable, but you don't know which snowflake that falls is going to be the one that triggers the avalanche. So I guess it wasn't moving from minus 10 basis points to 0%. That didn't do it. But from going from 0 to 0.25%, 25 basis points, that was the thing that did it. Who knows? We just know that there's an unstable pile of shit that's in Japan, and they own all these assets around the world funded by yen. And this little change in the BOJ policy was a thing that set it all off. I don't think the BOJ thought that this would happen if they've communicated this policy. The whole point of what they're trying to do is to say, hey, we know there's a problem. Over time, we're going to get out of this position. So here's a very glacial pace way that we are going to cease manipulating the JGB market and cease printing money and allow the yen to gradually strengthen over time. And then gradually we'll be able to unwind all these positions. And so there's nothing to see here. Nothing's going to happen. No need to freak out. It's going to be super calm and collected. Now, obviously, that isn't what happened. They didn't think this was going to happen.
Fascinating. And obviously, they're going to probably hike at the end of the year as well. I've read the BOJ. So do you think that this unwinding will continue throughout the rest of the year? The Nikkei is up now again, higher than it was yesterday. So that's pretty crazy. Do you think the carry trade is going to continue unwinding? How much do you think it has to go?
I think that this is a structural trade that has to unwind over time. And so the BOJ might try to massage it, but ever since Kuruda stepped down in April of 2023, you would assume the mantle of BOJ governor specifically to unwind this trade. The question was, how fast are they going to do it? I would find it very unlikely that they're going to reverse course and say, oh, sorry, guys, we fucked up. We're going back to negative rates again. We're going to go unlimited JGB purchases. Yen goes from 145 to 180 to 200. And, Japanese people are getting really, really pissed off. I don't think that's what's going to happen. I think, and this is what I'm going to write about, is that Yellen and Powell will save the day by printing dollars and allowing the BOJ to unwind this trade and put it on the Fed's balance sheet.
And then coming back to, because you mentioned her, obviously, bad girl Yellen, because I know that you also alluded to this post you wrote, earlier in the year around the Treasury general account. And I say there's this it seems as if the Treasury's become kind of political now to try and increase liquidity running into the running into the US election. Do you think the Treasury has now become a political entity to a certain degree that, trying to
It's
increase
always been political. I think it's always been political, but the degree to which the establishment hates Donald Trump is influencing them to be very obvious in the ways that they're ramping markets right before key election dates. And so I am 100% confident that Yellen will do whatever is possible to help Kamala Harris's re-election chances. And that's also, an essential linchpin assumption to my belief that the Fed and the Treasury will use some of these esoteric programs that they have been already approved to use, like the central bank liquidity swap, to essentially print dollars, hand it to the BOJ, so the BOJ can hand out dollars to banks and corporates to say, hey, don't sell those U.S. bonds, those U.S. stocks in the open market. Hand them to me. I'll give you last price, no market impact. And here are some dollars. Go take those dollars, sell those, buy yen, and then come and buy these JGBs that I want to sell you too. And this kind of like shifts around the exposures between the different entities. But at the end of the day, the trade doesn't have to unwind. The yen strengthens, dollars are printed, U.S. markets continue to ramp, and the Democrats think they can get reelected.
Wow. Yeah. So obviously, this is obviously now on the macro side, had massive impacts on global markets, as you just alluded to, right? But it's obviously had a massive impact on crypto. So I guess, do you think, firstly, when it comes to the carry trade specifically, do you think that there are funds and crypto funds and entities engaged in borrowing yen to actually invest in crypto on the risk on side? Or is it just a factor that people are generally selling out of risk on assets in broadly, and everyone's then selling crypto because that's in the same, now it seems to be in the same bucket? Like, do you know that people actually engaged in buying crypto through this carry trade?
Absolutely, people do. It's a very standard practice if you run any sort of TradFi-ish fund. You want to have the cheapest cost of funds as possible. And so if your risk managers allow it, and I'm sure there's a lot of funds that do, and you have access to yen from your bank or your broker, you're going to borrow that yen and you're going to fund it, and you're going to buy Bitcoin ETFs. You'll buy some Bitcoin spot or whatever it is that you can buy in the crypto ecosystem alongside the stocks and bonds that you might invest in as well. So it's just another asset. And if you look at the Bitcoin Japanese yen price before, 3-4 days ago, it's been screaming higher. So the trade has worked. And so you're like, great, let me just do some more of that. If the BOJ is going to keep these rates at zero, I'll take rates at zero. Buy Bitcoin, it's, best performing asset since 2009 in human history. Yeah, that's a great trade. I'll keep doing that. So absolutely, this borrowing yen has filtered into the crypto ecosystem. And then on the other side is when you have a correlation in one moment, like a massive de-risking across the whole financial ecosystem, you sell what you can, not what you want. And so, okay, crypto's liquid. You can sell it immediately. Those dog shit commercial real estate properties you have, or that REIT that trades at a discount to NAV, or some of the other shit that you have in your portfolio that isn't as liquid as crypto, you have to hold on to it because you don't want to basically get completely annihilated on the market price selling into a super liquid market. Sell your crypto, it's liquid.
Cool. So then more broadly, let's assume come back to the markets, come back to crypto markets and Bitcoin and potentially alt season, like it's been delayed for quite some time now. When is the season coming? Delayed season. Do you think that now with what's going on with Yellen and running into the US election, do you think that when do you see alt season coming? If we're going to see any sort of alt season or Bitcoin recovery and past its all-time highs, do you still think we see that before the end of the year?
So I think it's very path dependent. So let's say this is my belief, and take it with a huge grain of salt. So I think that U.S. authorities, Fed, and Yellen particularly, because she really runs the show, get very concerned if stocks drop more than 20%. So all-time high in S&P and NASDAQ was in middle of July, and now we're about 10%ish from that level. If we see S&P and NASDAQ down 20 to 30%, that's a big deal. Because if you think about it, the rich baby boomer voters who got to show up at the election, vote Democrat or Republican, are going to be very pissed off at whoever's in charge. It doesn't matter what the party is. That right now it's the Democrats. They're in charge. So if you have a financial crisis on your watch, and my stock portfolio is down 20, 30%, and now I have to stop traveling around the world and adjust my lifestyle, I'm going to be pissed off. And worst case, I vote for the other side, Trump, little bit worse, a little bit less worst case is I just don't even show up. I don't vote. So I was going to go out and vote for Harris. Now I'm just going to sit my ass at home because you fucked up my stock portfolio. You should have done something. Why is there this financial crisis that's happening in the middle of election season? So I think that the level of stock prices is very important. And on the other level is the U.S. government funds a large part of its revenue from capital gains taxes, from basically tech stocks. In certain states like California, their whole income statement is basically how much money did they make from tech bros because their stock portfolios went up. And so again, if you're seeing stocks down 20 to 30%, no one's paying any taxes, your deficit's going to explode. So the U.S. government needs a higher stock market. And I think that is the trigger that could get these guys to act very soon. So if we go into Friday and S&P and NASDAQ are down 20% from the highs, and it's looking like over the weekend it's going to be, quite volatile opening on Monday, then I think we could get some sort of action over the weekend. But that depends on the yen, if I retrace a bit, if it comes back down and strengthens some more, we get more equity weakness into the weekend, then we could get something in the short term. If this kind of crisis fades out, nothing really happens, things tread water, then I think we got to wait a bit, maybe 1 or 2 months, come into the fall, people get comfortable again, and then boom, it starts again. And then they'll definitely have to act then because they'll be a few weeks or a few days out from the U.S. election. And again, Harris cannot have, going into the early November, the key cohort of rich baby boomers not feeling good about their stock portfolios. So that's definitely going to be attributed to her and Joe Biden, even if, it's not their fault.
But I guess the first and most important question is do you think that this crypto becoming so political in terms of one side versus the other is a risk potentially because, betting all on one side or the other? And do you think how do you think it's going to play out?
I guess it's only a risk if the market assumes certainty of victory for a particular candidate. Obviously, that's Trump, right? So he had the really amazing debate performance. Well, I guess Joe Biden just basically proved he was a fucking vegetable. We already knew that, but now everyone saw it on national television. And he had that amazing photo after he got shot or assassination attempt, right? That was the highest, in my opinion, probability of a Trump victory that he would ever have. And then Joe Biden got replaced with Harris. Harris might be a complete fool, but she's not 80 years old. And, she's whoever she is, it doesn't really matter. She's just not Trump. And so she's going to do better than Biden just by mathematics. So Trump's chance of winning is going to fall. So if you were a Bitcoiner or a crypto person, you said, I'm going to buy more crypto because I believe that the U.S. regulatory stance is going to change in a favorable manner to my portfolio. And that means I believe that Trump's going to win. And look at how amazing he's done. But now those odds are sliding. Then you're going to become less bullish about doing that. I think that's a bit about what's happening. I think in the longer term, it doesn't really matter who wins because whether it's a Democrat or Republican person, they both will hand out goodies to their constituents. The Republicans will cut taxes. The Democrats will do more government welfare. At the end of the day, the deficit rises. Money is printed and borrowed, and the denominator amount of fiat global dollar liquidity increases. Therefore, Bitcoin and crypto goes up. But again, that's not an immediate term thing. It's just a result of what happens in, American electoral politics. So yeah, there's a risk that come November, if you were saying, I'm going to, buy more Bitcoin because of Trump, and it looks like Trump might lose or it's a coin toss with Harris, then that sort of premium is going to fade from the market. And I think that's already happening as Trump's election odds are diminishing.